空気をサイエンスすることからその走りは生まれた。スバルアルシオーネ。
When the car first launched, the New York Times called it the jazziest in design. And after editing this video, I strongly back that statement. These cars are criminally underrated and there's really nothing left like them. So, without further ado, let's talk about the jazziest in design. While there were 5 main designers and 7 design teams, it would be Kiyoichi Ikari that would write about it in his book. The Alcyone we know was not the first. An earlier design project commissioned in 1979 won Mr. Ikari a Subaru of America commendation. As for the Alcyone we know, the keyword crisp was at work. Initially, teams worked on scale models, utilising common parts, until the third model, after which aerodynamic targets and creative design freedom meant that excess volume began to be removed. Mr. Ikari also notes that prior to starting designs, Subaru of America's president provided a photograph of the Jaguar Ascot for design input. The Ascot came from design house Bertone and also features an aerodynamic wedge shape. This will be important later. Subaru also had an aerodynamics team working in conjunction with the design team to engineer design decisions like the rear height and flush door handles. As mentioned last episode, the viability of the flat 6 hadn't been determined, and as a result multiple front ends were created. When the exterior design was mostly established, the interior began. Design was determined by the approval of Mr. Nagota, who rejected many of the initial designs. Many subsequent redesigns are what ultimately determined the telescopic steering setup. Mr. Ikari also notes that the digital gauge cluster, set to be designed alongside the analog, was the result of a bold young designer. In my opinion, regardless of the car's success, this gauge cluster was completely based. The gear selection stick has also been discussed since the car's release, and I'll clarify that after a trip to the aviation department in Utsunomiya, Mr. Ikari decided that the control stick, used in Japanese anti-tank helicopters, was a fitting choice for the Subaru sports car. The dull flat hubcap design was inspired by the graph paper used by the designers, and of course, that the car's resulting design reached the aerodynamic drag coefficient target of 0.29, tested and refined utilizing the wind tunnel in Yatabe. Now to add my touch to otherwise accessible information. From this part of the video onwards, the research I have is mainly from abandoned Subaru forums, Japanese blogs, and my own speculation. So to make sure no other lazy journos don't try and cite this video, put on your tinfoil hats. Remember earlier when I said the Ascot by Bertone was important? Let's go back to that. Because Bertone did many wedge cars, such as the Lancia Stratos. But the real thing to note is a man known as Giorgetto Giugiaro. He worked at Bertone from 59 to 65 and started the very well known Ital design in 1968. Giugiaro would design many wedge shaped cars like the De Tomaso and the DeLorean, and even turned journalists onto the design language terminology folded paper. Meanwhile in Japan, folded paper is called origami, and they had also been doing it when it came to cars. For example, the Dome Zero. So when did the conspiracies begin? Well, we'll start with the Dome Zero and work backwards. Single wiper bladed knife of a car with pop-up headlights. Plain and simple, the Alcyone, it's just the poor man's Dome Zero. It should be called the Cope Zero. But in all seriousness, let's go back to Giugiaro, because in 1984 he showcased the Lotus Etna. Now unfortunately this car was in essence stillborn, pretty similar to the Dome Zero, which couldn't become street legal. The Etna and the Alcyone are insanely similar, and I have no doubt the Japanese were, let's just say, inspired by the Etna. Big statement, and I don't really have much to back it up, other than that the redesign of the front bumper from the Alcyone went from what we know as the turbo bumper which first appeared on the SCX2, to the Zenki bumper that was used on the car's launch. Pretty similar to the Etna. Oh, and because that's kind of a weak link, Giorgio also was the guy who redesigned the later Alcyone, its successor, the SVX. So, yeah. For anyone who's made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks heaps. These aren't easy to do, they take up time, and yeah, it means a lot, so thank you.